Hello and welcome back to the MicroAdvice Podcast. Today, our spotlight is on Xealth and a serial entrepreneur, Mike McSherry, behind the helm of the Seattle-based healthcare startup. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks, Jim. Happy to be here.
That's fantastic. So, Mike, over the past 2.5 decades, you've built and led 6 innovative companies where many of the products have touched billions of consumers, such as Swype and Boost Mobile. You've also advised countless startups on the telecommunications and healthcare space. So, through it all, I take it that you've learned a ton about the specific nuances that drive a superior customer experience. So, let's get started with when you're building out a new venture. How do you balance a focus on customer, product, sales, and just surely everything else given limited resources?
Well, that's every startup experience. You have to focus the amount of funding, which equates to the team and the resource allocation, to the most immediate pressing need for that business. And it oftentimes depends on the channel that you're going after, whether or not it's direct to consumer, B2C, B2B, B2B2C, service oriented, industry oriented. So there's so many different nuances to that question. And I think it depends on the domain and the problem you're trying to solve, and then hiring up the resources necessary to execute and work on that solution.
Okay, so you mentioned something in there around just making sure you have the right resources in play. And I guess that's based on experience or maybe domain expertise in a particular area.
Yeah, well, I go back to one VC, Fred Wilson. He's kind of famous VC. He's simplified the role of a CEO at early stage startups to doing 3 things well. One, communicate the vision. That's sales. That's evangelism. That's marketing. It's the storytelling of the product ideation. 2, hire well. Make sure you've got a good, solid team around you, people that can execute, people that are doers. And then 3, don't run out of money. And that's where the funding comes in for, option number 1 and 2. So, how do you raise enough cash to do the things and execute? And then as you're growing, have capacity to raise more money, et cetera. So, every startup has its own different needs and capabilities. And one of the paths that I've done in my career in those 6 startups that you referenced is every single one of them was a joint venture from day one, or the first investment was strategic. So I would actually say 3, maybe 4 of those companies were joint ventures. So that takes care of a lot of your funding needs, or first product customer kind of needs, et cetera, on that front. So that's sort of just been one of my capacities to create a solution that addresses the problem for a larger partner, and they can be both a source of funding as well as a customer for the product in and of itself. So I like to pull a triple whammy of getting first customer, getting funding, and getting product validation expertise, all throughout the early product life cycles of what I'm attempting.
It's a really interesting avenue you took. And I think it might be counterintuitive to some entrepreneurs who think that the typical path is come up with an idea, get a couple of co-founders, go get some VC funding or angel investor funding, and then take the path from there. I love the joint venture approach because you mentioned it takes multiple different paths at once. With the funding, you get some talent, you already have a customer in mind. So that's
Well,
interesting.
it de-risks, and so maybe you give up a little equity on the front side of that. But many of the things that I've attempted wouldn't have gotten off the ground without that partner sitting alongside in very first case. Boost was a joint venture with Nextel, and at the time there were no MVNOs out there in the market, and Nextel didn't have a prepaid offering. So we went into Nextel and said, hey, we want to be your prepaid solution. And Nextel's like, why? And so then it came out like, well, I'll let you be my prepaid solution, but I'm keeping 2/3 of it, and we'll let you keep 1/3 of it. But then we'll do all the back office, we'll do all the support and maintenance and buy the devices on your behalf and the provisioning and et cetera, et cetera. So, that's an example of a company that never would have gotten off the ground. Nextel never would have given us a license unless they entered in this joint venture structure. My very first company was a web development company in Australia, and it was a joint venture with Australia's biggest ad agency. And this was in 97 when websites 1.0 were putting a brochure of a company online. And we had a more sophisticated platform than that. But still, they had Intel, Microsoft, Toyota, the largest bank in Australia, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, our customers need websites. Will you build them for them? So that was that's how we built our business, was these referrals from this large ad agency that didn't have the technical capacity of building these websites. So it just depends on what the problem is you're solving and the partnership benefits to both sides. And then obviously you have to play some exit scenarios out and make sure that you've got a clean slate to sell on the back end of that opportunity.
So that's interesting. And that takes me to another question. So you've obviously identified some areas here around getting started, and you've grown these companies to massive exit amounts. So what are some key tips or success stories you've had when building a business that maintains sustainable growth and scalability past the initial startup stage?
Well, I like to hire flexible, smart utility players, people that, as a company is growing, can figure out all the problems. No matter what, a startup is solving a new set of problems. The problems that they're attacking did not exist, or they create problems along the way, or the unintended consequences, or whatever. So you need nimble people around you to say, well, we knew we would be able to sell this, but what I didn't contemplate was I'd also have to then support that, or do this, or partner with this, or accommodate this level of additional product capacity that we just didn't contemplate. And so I love to have intelligent people around me to help problem solve, or at least identify what the problems are, and then you can start working on solutions, be it more money, be it more resources, be it buying someone, whatever. There's a myriad of different approaches, but you need someone to be able to identify problems as they're sort of emerging, or as you're planning new capacities, and then being clever enough to help identify the solutions for those problems. So, scaling, every product has scaling challenges at a certain point if it becomes successful. And that creates its own set of problems, but it's the flexibility of the team, and ultimately, depending, especially in technology products, a level of product architecture that allows you to build a scalable platform, ecosystem on top of, to help maneuver and solve all these additional problems that come up.
I love that, and have learned early on, never go to leadership or a customer with problems without solutions, or at least recommended solutions ahead of time, because there's plenty of problems out there, but it's thinking through those different scenarios and trying to come up with maybe even an experimental approach of how to solve them.
Yeah, I give career advice to younger people a lot, and one of them I like to do, especially if people are trying to break into technology, is just go for the fastest growing rocket ship of a company. I was lucky enough to get started at Microsoft in 93 on internet stuff. So really early on, got started. And if you showed yourself capable, just more and more responsibility was heaped upon you, and sort of these oh, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And so your maturity level at responsibility is exponential in some of these faster growing companies or divisions or capabilities that you just don't get if you're like a management trainee at company X, and you're going to do this role for 2 years, and then you can look around for your one level promotion, blah blah blah. If you're on a fast growing company and you prove yourself a go-to person for solving problems within that company, when the next set of problems come up, they're going to say, hey, John, can you handle this area of responsibility in addition? And that is a career growth trajectory that I think is beneficial if you're an energetic and ambitious career starter.
That's very sage advice. Mike, so, whenever we get started with a company, and I've had this debate with a couple of different founders and different product and service companies, is it better to be product led or customer led whenever you're in this high growth stage? And then how do you balance these?
That's not an easy answer, and it depends upon the focus of your business. If all you are is an app in the App Store, I would say you're 100% product led. Yes, you care about feedback ratings in the App Store, and that becomes the basis for your, satisfaction on the customer side, but it's product, product, product. When you are in a B2B cycle and you're selling to other businesses, then you have to care much more about the customer feedback and the satisfaction and the tech enabled services and the roadmap planning and sharing that roadmap with the multi-set of customers so that it is meeting a market need and you're gauging as much dynamic feedback from the market as you are in your own product planning, et cetera. So it sort of depends upon your audience and your go-to-market channel. If you're direct to consumer, then it inevitably becomes more of a product focused solution where you are betting on what the market needs and wants and deliver that. When you have to go through channels or even a lot of B2B to C channels, you've got to keep that business you're selling into satisfied so that they have an end product that they're happy to deliver to their customers. So I don't know that there's an easy set answer, and you just have to figure it out in your market and your domain. Now, I myself am a technology basis guy, so I always am proud of the product and the technology. But depending upon the industry, you can get too wedded to that vision and not take enough of the customer focused kind of approach and SaaS delivery. I'm in healthcare now, and unfortunately, the technology, the user experience, the usability, the scalable architecture gets devalued in light of what problem you're solving for that customer and your capacity to deliver against some other set of metrics that they value just as much as they do the pure technology software.
So that's really fascinating in there, particularly around healthcare. Something you had mentioned early on in your answer is focusing on the segment, the domain, the customer, target customer. So, in your opinion or what you've seen, have companies and startups been successful in identifying those right from the start?
Yeah, you absolutely have to know whenever you're starting a company,
Hmm.
you've got a vision of the problem you want to solve. And it could be micro. I'm going to solve this little, widget, and then expand from there, or it could be expansive. I'm going to be a platform that solves world hunger and like so broad, but then you need to go to market kind of like niche focus. I'm going to start here and then expand beyond there. And you see it in both ways. I mean, like, look, Amazon, Jeff Bezos apparently, he named it Amazon because he knew that he wanted to like sell everything at some point. But then let me start on the book kind of side. And then you get all these other kind of like engineering delivered, someone's like, oh, I built this little widget. It solved a problem for me. Oh, it solved a problem for my friends. Oh, it solved a problem for an industry. And they kind of like build it from like that very micro focused kind of capacity without ever really thinking about, an end state when they first solved it. I love I love the story of Airbnb. I mean, who doesn't, right? But it first started off like as couch surfing, and they get rejected by 100 different VCs, and like, oh, who's going to sleep on a couch? Do I want some random person sleeping on my couch? And then it kind of morphed into like, well, you can rent a room in a house. Well, that might be tolerable. Shared bathroom, strangers, maybe, I don't know. So then all of a sudden you can rent a whole house or a whole condo. And now it's worth more than the entire US hotel industry. And so when they first started, I don't know if they had the whole vision that they were going to basically replace hotel bookings and be larger than the entire US hotel industry. So it depends a little bit on your vision and capacity. And some of that goes to the storytelling. If you are very, very persuasive to VCs, you can say, I'm going to solve this entire industry problem. And if you've got enough credibility or domain knowledge or trust or that someone is willing to bet on you on that massive expansive vision, and that's likely to cost a lot of money, and they buy on the vision, and they're like, and you sort of say, but I'm only going to solve this one narrow niche first. That's going to be my beachhead, and then I'm going to add on, and my roadmap's going to be solving XYZ to expand to that massive vision. That's one way of approaching a company and storytelling and raising funds. Another is like, solve this micro problem and then kind of expand, ratchet yourself up. Okay, I solved that, and now I got revenue, and because I've been solving this micro problem for this company and industry, I've realized that if I were able to add on this little add-on, then I could just add that to my customer contract, and they would be paying me double, and I don't have to go through the sales and marketing cost burden to the company. So now I've just doubled my revenue, but I can amortize the sales and marketing outlay. So you just expand from that micro beachhead that was your initial intended vision. And that's more narrow vision to get started, but arguably it can lead to more incremental success. But it just depends on where you're at, where your career is, your ambition, and what story you can sell to market around investment that the market recognizes the problem that you're solving, and they trust that you will be the one that brings that solution to bear.
Okay, interesting. And along those same lines, maybe this applies more to services than product-based companies, but how do you find your customer base, particularly in a more broader area like a advisory firm or consulting firm, something like that? Any thoughts around that?
Well, so again, these are somewhat tough questions, but I'll
Mhm.
dissect it a little bit about my markets. I mean, if you're direct to consumer, like, great, are you a widget that gets sold on a retail shelf and you have to get shelf space and distribution and marketing and brand awareness? If you're an app in the App Store, it's customer ratings and SEO optimization and App Store placements and referral links and uh, you know click to buy, click to call, click, CTA, customer acquisition kind of, metrics on, that, and that's direct to consumer. If you're in a B2B space, it's your segment and who amongst that segment are you selling to? And every market has to have some degree of segment. Are you large enterprise, or are you small to medium sized business? Or are you individual practitioners? Um, are you trying to knock down large enterprise corporate sales? That means you need your own enterprise sales staff. Or are you a little tool that someone could whip out a credit card and buy, but with enough adoption, then you can scale up to an enterprise or system-wide level contract across that organization. So you need to segment against small, medium-sized business, large enterprise, the sales efforts, the marketing efforts, the push pull acquisition level efforts of branding versus sales. And every segmentation is going to have a degree of segmentation. Now, been I've done a couple of B2B to C efforts, business to business sale for consumer distribution. And Swype was an example of that. It was a consumer that people used on their phone, knew it, loved it, but my sale was to the phone manufacturer. The software, so for those not familiar, Swype was a touchscreen keyboard put on a couple billion mobile phones. It got started before the iPhone was released. And then when the iPhone was released, the whole Android world needed a competing alternative and a narrative to sell against the iPhone as a mechanism of differentiation and superior product performance. So in an 18-month period, we had 15 of the top 20 largest phone and tablet manufacturers in the world sign deals with us and distribute the software. It was on every single Samsung phone, LG phone, Dell tablet, HP tablet, Kindle device, you name it, et cetera. But that's an example of, we sold it to the phone and tablet manufacturers who then distributed it to the consumers. And we propagated the Swype brand. Consumers came to know, love, trust, want the Swype brand, but I did not have a direct channel to those consumers. It was only by preloading that software on the phone manufacturers. So, and there was a dance with Apple on M&A and other kind of dynamics around that, but that's another path to channel distribution and retail distribution of whatever product or service that is you're delivering.
Well, that is an incredible story with Swype. I didn't know that. So Swype is something I use every day across all of my phones,
Yeah.
tablets, but it's amazing hearing how it got started to what we use every day now.
Yeah, well, I'm very proud of Swype, but the recognition has to go to
Mhm.
the founders who invented the technology for people with disabilities.
Mhm.
At the time, there was, think Stephen Hawking in a wheelchair, and he had to do a puff on every single letter selection using some eye tracking headgear. And someone just said, what if you could do a continuous eye trace over a virtual keyboard? Could you auto predict the word? And so the founder tinkered with the software for a few years trying to solve that problem for people with disabilities. And I got introduced to him after he had been working on this for a couple of years, and he was about ready to start showing it to people, saying, hey, do you think this would work? So I just had the easy job of showing it to people and telling the story. And it so coincided that the iPhone was released shortly thereafter. So the whole world needed this mass scale solution, because at the end of the day, we all have a degree of disabilities at limited motor control and using keyboards on these smaller devices. And that solution that was invented for someone with disabilities, then had mainstream success. But same thing with voice recognition. Alexander Graham Bell invented it, the telephone, for help his deaf wife communicate, and speech recognition was built for people with voice and hearing challenges. And so there's lots of technology that has been developed in light of specifically helping people with disabilities overcome some of their communication challenges. It just goes on to have mainstream success for the entire world.
Yeah, that's incredible. And just thinking through that, Swype has been an overwhelming success. I would say. Have all of your companies been like Swype, or if not, have you taken those lessons learned and applied them to future companies? Any tidbits in there?
Yeah, I co-founded a company that raised almost $400 million and went bankrupt, gone. All of it disappeared. It was in the mobile space. We were a phone carrier that was effectively trying to compete with Verizon and T-Mobile and AT&T. It was a MVNO, mobile virtual network operator, meaning that we bought Verizon's network at wholesale prices and resold it as a phone carrier under the brand Amped Mobile to a swath of consumers that we thought we had a differentiated brand and a differentiated consumer experience. And what we found was the complexity and challenges. I mentioned Boost was a joint venture with Nextel, and Nextel did all that back office and device provisioning and procurement and customer service. At Amped Mobile, like, oh, that we can do that. That's easy. So we took that on, in addition to not just being prepaid, but being postpaid, which means giving people credit. So you sell them a device, and they have that device for 4 weeks before you're expecting them to repay that. So you're out for the cost of the device, and you're out for a month's worth of phone usage, and then the person has to pay you at the end of that month. Well, this was in '06, early subprime, '04, '05, '06, early subprime. And there was a lot of fraud. Verizon's network couldn't tell us all the long distance charges being made during that time period. So we had people racking up $60,000 phone bills to Saudi Arabia, and we wouldn't get the fraud alert notice until 24 hours later.
Oh.
And we're on the hook for having to pay Verizon for that $60,000 phone bill, but I
Mm.
had no fraud tools to detect it for that 24-hour period. So the level of sophistication and scale necessary to do the back office fraud and provisioning and credit checks and collections and XXX scaled against a startup company just did not work. And it was part hubris, part naivete, which is part of any startup experience. And we raised $400 million. We had significant investors backing
Mm.
that vision, but the world of telco operations, there's a reason why around the globe there's typically only 3 or 4 carriers in any one market, and they all have I don't know, call it 20% to 40% market share in that market. And to break in with like, hey, I'm the new upstart and I'm going to do everything that Verizon does, but I'm going to do it with 200 employees, just not work. And yes, we lost $400 million, but our investors were Qualcomm and Intel and MTV and Universal Music and VCs and hedge funds and Verizon. And so every, all smart investors trying ambitiously to disrupt the dynamic of these large incumbents. It's just some industries are easier to penetrate than others.
That is fascinating. I never thought about it like that in those terms. It just takes it's such a massive infrastructure change, and
I mean, telco is particularly challenging. I mean,
right.
uh, and but yet there are big swings. Like when we lost $400 million, there was an ESPN mobile and a Disney mobile and a Helio mobile and
Mhm.
XXX. There was probably $2 to $3 billion spent in that same time frame at others trying to do mobile telco plays. All of them went bankrupt. So it's not just our $400 million that we lost, but I think between Disney Mobile and ESPN Mobile, both owned by ESPN, they probably lost a combined $700 million, maybe close to a billion on that effort, and that still failed. And then I don't know if you remember, but like Teledesic and Bill Gates and Craig McCarr are launching satellite internet and satellite phone.
Hmm.
These
Yeah.
and they've lost billions of dollars doing that. Elon Musk is trying it from space with he's piggybacking on SpaceX having cheap orbital launches for satellites, and now he's trying SpaceLink. Is this? It's initially just broadband cable replacement, but could he eventually have a cellular service linked off of that? Maybe, but he's spending billions of dollars in pursuing that level of effort. But telco takes big swings on the risk reward ratio of these startup efforts.
So from a customer perspective, it seems like this is from a technological perspective. From a customer perspective, have you seen or know of any examples where a product or service might work, but still fail the customer in the end?
Oh yeah, execution is everything in a startup.
Hmm.
You could have the best product, but if you don't have a sales and marketing and pricing and operations to scalably deploy it, that can be a point of failure. I mean, we all know the story of what is it, VHS versus Betamax or whatever, and or all the DVD, kind of like wars, and it, it, it's uh, it's all about aligning business product metrics interest on your side that your proposed solution kind of wins. And so you can have the best product in the world, but without the operations and execution and go to market, it could fail. And I'm not going to say that a sales driven culture beats out a product driven culture. It goes on both ways. Microsoft, I'd sort of argue is, especially now, as a sales driven culture. Not to discredit Azure and everything else, but the way that Azure is beating AWS right now is they've got I don't know, tens of thousands, millions of customers around the world that buy Office and Windows and, SharePoint and XXX. And like, hey, do you want to file save as to Azure off that and save to the cloud? Okay, it's an easy add-on. And so uh, Microsoft's strength now is their enterprise sales that then enables them to distribute the more products that they're building and delivering to the market. Whereas there are other companies that are, Google is a very, very product-led company, and that's why their cloud business is not being successful in doing the enterprise sales nearly as much as say Azure. So there's different approaches for different products, and I'm not going to choose one over the other. I myself lean more on the product capability side and rest on the laurels and feel pride in what I build at a technical capability versus hiring top-notch salespeople that wine and dine the client and get X Y
Right.
Z thing, representing an inferior product, but some manner of sales persuasion, convince the customer. That's not something that I've ever wanted to pursue in what I build or deliver to my customers.
Yeah, you and me both. I'm more on the customer success operational side than pure sales. I don't know how those guys do it. They're great at their job, but it's
I
not something in my quiver there.
I mean, oftentimes salespeople are the best paid people at a company, highest
Hmm.
paid people at a company. If
Yeah.
they've a very hardcore sales driven organization, they'll compensate the salespeople, and that creates a interesting dynamic against your engineers or your product people, et cetera.
Hey, so final question for today, Mike. This has been amazing insight. I love it. And I could probably talk to you all day with various questions. But something that I've been pondering and have been reading about in a startup failure situation is executive discord. So, whenever the executive team may want to take a different approach to something, some might be more sales oriented, some are more product, some are more engineering, and just can't find that gel. Is this something you've seen as an inhibitor to long-term success for a startup and maybe even resulting in a failure?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I know countless stories about that. But the thing that maybe I feel most proud of in my career is the loyalty I've engendered with an executive team that I've worked with. My father spent 20 years in the Navy, and he was in Vietnam War, and he talks about quote foxhole friends. Would you trust these people with your life? And in business, I'm never in that dynamic. Uh, but there's part of that loyalty and trust that stays with me with his service. And my older brother's in Afghanistan now. My younger brother's a fireman. Like I I have a very service oriented, kind of legacy, if you will. And my COO and I have worked together for 25 years. We shared an office together at Microsoft in 94. And when I moved to Australia and started that company, I convinced him to quit Microsoft and move down there with me. And he was my COO at Swype, and he's my COO at Xealth right now. So that's someone that I've found a great working relationship with for 25 years. My CTO, I've worked with for 15 years. And you just find I think 7 of our Xealth employees are ex Swype employees. You find these people that know you, trust you, like working with you, the collegiality, the respect. And so I don't know that I've ever really encountered that discord at an executive level that you referenced. And I'm willing to make compromises in my team on my equity share versus their equity share, collaborative working relationship. I've got a family, they've got family. Hey, you cover for me while I'm, going on this vacation with my family and vice versa. So I put the camaraderie and loyalty of my team above my personal ambition, success, et cetera. And we're a very collaborative, driven organization versus like a mercurial founder led, do it my way or the highway, kind of level of effort. And that's something that I've found engenders trust, loyalty, and respect. And I think it's recognized by the customers I have on the other side of the table and what I create and the venture investing that has supported my business efforts. And so, but, and if I go back to, my Swype story, the guy who had created that software, I worked on a handshake with him for a year. We didn't have a legal contract. I didn't take a salary. I put several $100,000s of my own personal cash into the company. But my equity share on being the CEO for the company, that was all on a handshake agreement for 12 months in working with him.
Wow.
So
That's trust. That is a true example of trust right there. That's
but it's
incredible.
how I've chosen to do business, and it's worked out well for me. I can't say it will for everyone.
That's amazing. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. This was amazing advice. I really do appreciate your time.
No, thank you, Jim. It's been great chatting with you, and hopefully your audience finds these anecdotes and stories helpful in their own pursuits for a career.
I'm sure they will. This is definitely some platinum level advice that I really hope makes its way out there, because so many can learn from this. And thank you all for listening. If you have any questions or thoughts around a customer experience topic, please drop me a line on LinkedIn. We'll see you back here, same place, same time next week. Have a good week. Bye now.